Welcome to this week's Beloved Blackness. I'm Dr. B. I want to piggyback on what I started to describe last week when I referenced Dr. Linda James Meyer's 4 phases of oppression. So, the first phase that she mentioned was when the physical survival is in the hands of the enslaver or oppressor through the means of terrorization and dehumanization. So, just to forewarn you, this particular video segment, it's going to be painful to hear some of the details of that first phase, but so important. In order for us as people of African descent to actually get to our belovedness, we actually have to talk about those things that were intentionally done to us in order to mar or scar or negatively impact our sense of our belovedness or our dignity and worth, as Dr. King's quote referenced. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the ways in which our physical survival was kept in the hands of the enslaver through terrorization and dehumanization. Dr. Marimba Ani, she's an African-centered scholar and author. She's the author of the book Yurugu. And she talks about and uses this word Maafa. Some people use the term the African Holocaust to describe the experiences of people of African descent in terms of the enslavement process. And it actually can be used more broadly, but it specifically is a Kiswahili word that means a great disaster and destruction beyond human comprehension. Okay, Maafa. Maafa, Maafa. And when we talk about the Maafa as African-centered psychologists, we're often talking about what happened through the enslavement process, but also we're talking about even what happened after enslavement that continues to be a great disaster and destruction that's beyond human comprehension in terms of the psychological impact of the dehumanization process of people of African descent. So I want to talk a little bit about this phase one. The physical captivity is held in the hands, physical survival is held in the hands of the enslaver or the captor, and through the methods of dehumanization and terrorization. So when our ancestors were actually captured, there was a process, several-fold process of what happened. So if you think about being captured away from the coastal areas, inland on the continent of Africa, there had to be a period of time, some people refer to as the slave marches, where the enslaver or even the trader of enslaved people would take masses of African people from the inland areas all the way to the coastal areas. So think about, where the ships needed to depart from. So that was a process that started right then from the villages, where most of the time when they were walking along down those marches, they were stripped of their clothing. They were given very minimal amount of water, just enough to survive, that intentionally the enslaver wanted to use as few resources as possible. That means clothing, food, water, in order to maximize their financial gain. So they try to bring as many people as possible out of the inland areas to the coastal areas. And if they're hardly feeding you, hardly giving you water, you can imagine the millions of people who died before even getting to the coastal area. Okay, so that's the first phase of the physical survival being in the hands of the enslaver through dehumanization and terrorization. The dehumanizing part is you can't even eat. You can't even have water. When you are hungry or thirsty, you don't even have it. You can't even have clothes on your back the way you'd be clothed if you were at home in your village. The terrorization part was anytime our people even tried to communicate any needs, even the need to communicate verbally with one another, they'd be met with the lash. They'd be met with some kind of violent response to keep them from communicating that they actually had human needs. So if someone tried to communicate from someone who's from the same village, they would be brutalized and made to not communicate verbally. And so this was an effort to prevent any rebellious response or any protestation to the captivity that was being done. So here they are being moved inland from inland areas to the coastal areas. And once they got to the coastal areas, those who made it, okay, once they got to the coastal areas, those people then would be placed in what people often call the enslaved dungeons, all right, along the coastal areas. Another or several instances of dehumanization and terrorization would occur there. So they would often be branded with irons, okay, treated, as if they are literally cattle. Put in these dungeons, dark, dingy areas, a lot of people trapped in there. Many would die from suffocation, not enough air, would be underground, so definitely not getting any sun. Many would be there and would be raped. They would even be raped when they were walking from the inland areas to the coastal areas, but also would be raped. Heads would be shaven, men and women. No clothing given. And chains would be placed around their necks and their ankles. Some just the ankles, but often would be chained and would be kept in these dungeons until the people who brought them, the Europeans who brought them from the inland area to the coastal area, then would sell them to traders, those who owned the ships, and then they would then board the ship. And next week, I want to talk more about what that process looked like in terms of the Middle Passage once they boarded the ship. So if you think about what I just described today, we literally are the progeny of those ancestors who survived both physical terror, psychological brutality, physical acts of degradation, violation, and a process of belittling, gravely belittling. Something that when we use the word Maafa, it's intentional because it is beyond human comprehension. That level of violation of the dignity and worth of our ancestors was taken in order to bring us for use into captivity. And I'm speaking specifically in terms of in the Americas. So to be continued, we'll talk more next week. We have to get into the nitty-gritty ugliness of what has been done to us before we can actually get to our belovedness, because that's important that we own the truth of those horrors in order to be able to peel back and work through the layers of pain associated with that in order to be able to get to understanding who we are and our value and our belovedness. Until next week.